All right. Hello, everyone. This is Trip. And today on the podcast and the live stream for all of you that are joining us live is Ilia Delio. And we've been having a series. The first time on the when I switched to Substack, I had to come up with a name for it. And I thought process this, which is both like that I enjoy process philosophy and such. So process this. And what happens in most of the podcast is I read someone's book and then we process it together. And I thought, this is good. And so then I decided, well, let's try having a series where I talk to scholars in different disciplines around the same topic. And the first one was I went for was artificial intelligence. So we've had a host of different people from like lawmakers, philosophers from different parts of theologians from different parts of the church, different kinds of science and such. And now here we are, Ilia, which, it's kind of like talking to the home team when in the process this series, I get to talk to you about AI. But you're also Catholic. So there you go. Our ecumenical diversity is happening right now.
It's great to be here with you, as always.
Oh, yeah. And very excited that you're coming to Theology Beer Camp this year in October.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because that's going to be fun. It's going to be fun.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things I thought that might be helpful, knowing that we've had people from a host of different perspectives. Michael Morelli, who's spent a lot of time advancing like a very deep critique via Jacques Ellul and company of technology and theology. And then Caputo's been on, who I know y'all are neighbors and interacted before, who, like you, shares a Catholic heritage, but a different philosophical background. Teilhard has been one of your conversation partners for a long time and really kind of has given birth to a host of different ways within the Catholic tradition. The transformations that are taking place in both our understanding of evolution, our place in the cosmos, and our relationship to technology and culture as it evolves. Like, he's been a major dialogue partner for you. And so I'd love to spend a bit of letting you kind of introduce him and that particular kind of train of thought or school of thought within in the way you see it, kind of enabling reflection on technology and such before getting more particular.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Trip. Sure, I'm happy to speak about Teilhard de Chardin. So for those who are not familiar, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was a French Jesuit and a scientist, a paleontologist by training, who born in 1881 and died in 1955. And he spent his entire career really in the field as a paleontologist, looking at the fossils of human evolution. But he was also a Jesuit, and so he had a deep Christian faith. And his love of science and his love of God came together in his own personhood, and in a very unique way that, many people still grapple with his ideas. But, one thing that Teilhard recognized is that religion and science are not separate disciplines. They're distinct in their own methods and language, etc. But they are actually like two ways of knowing the one world. So they're like a pair of eyeglasses, and you need each lens if you are to get a unified vision, field vision of the world. And so bringing together religion and technology, religion and science for Teilhard allowed him to maybe delve into the core doctrines of the Christian faith and come to new understandings of the question of God, the question of redemption, And he saw that divinity was not allergic to materiality, that God was part and parcel of what the physical cosmos was becoming, and we might call this a panentheistic type of approach, but he himself used the word pantheism, which just is makes Christians crazy. They, all of a sudden they go into an allergic reaction. But that's another topic, for discussion. I think what Teilhard, what he saw, and what I want to emphasize with Teilhard is that you have to step out from your normal day to day, how you experience the world, and you have to think in the largest cosmic context. Like if you were to step outside the universe, if such a thing would be possible, and take a broad cosmic view of that universe, what would you see? And in a sense, that's what he did. He was a broad cosmic thinker, and he saw, first of all, that the universe is a dynamic. It's not only ancient, we know that it's about 13.8 billion years old, but it's dynamic. There's something going on here. And second, he said, well, there's something that, not only is it going on, but it's becoming more unified. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or even, say, a biologist to realize that we're moving from cells to, kitty cats to humans, and now we're moving into transhumans. And so something's taking place. That's all he's saying. Something's happening here. And what marks the something is a pattern of greater complexity. So he developed the law of complexity consciousness. And basically, he said that evolution, in fact, he kind of marginalized, if not kind of dismissed, Darwin's theory, of natural selection as the, final answer to what evolution is about. And he said, well, there's certainly some selection going on here, but there's something even more significant and fundamental, and that is matter continues to complexify. The degrees of relationship continue to deepen, and they become to a great increase in intensity. And he says, as that happens, consciousness is increasing. So for Teilhard, and this is the important point to our topic today, evolution is the rise of consciousness. Now, which is very interesting because we really don't know what consciousness is, but just his position on it would lead us to at least assume that consciousness is not something that's distinct to the human person, but something much more fundamental. And therefore, he is taking the position that there's a fundamental basis of consciousness that drives matter, that drives material evolution. And then he also said, well, okay, so we have this law of complexity consciousness. And then he said, there's also kind of this recurring pattern that's taking place in evolution. Evolution being this unfolding, sort of like this unfinished universe that's continuing to develop and to grow into something more deeply personal and more deeply conscious. And he says this law of recurrence, or this law of recurrent pattern, has this pattern of wholeness. So he posited a principle of wholeness at the core of evolution that he called omega, the omega principle. And he said this principle is both scientific, in other words, it accounts for wholeness or unity in nature, but he said it's also religious. So it's a very unique principle that he, developed. And the scripture, the Bible speaks about the Alpha and the Omega as God, but he doesn't quite come out, from the beginning. He says, well, Omega is God. He's going to talk about Omega for a long time, and then he'll eventually come to that name God. But it does then, so Omega is this principle of wholeness that's within everything and yet distinct from everything. So really unique, right? It's governing this evolving wholeness, but it's not subject to the forces of entropy. And yet Omega itself is developing. It's not just a static principle. It itself is affected by the way evolution is moving towards complexity consciousness. So you could see Teilhard was a very unique thinker. Obviously, he did not follow all the rules and regulations of the Catholic Church. he actually stepped aside and said, wait a minute, there's something more going on here. Um, I can just say as a PS, this did not go well, with the big guys, who oversee everything. And so all of his writings on these matters were never published during his lifetime, which is too bad because I think had he received some positive criticism, he could have fine tuned his work, as we well know in academia how these things work. Anyway, to go back to Teilhard, so he sees this pattern. Here, then we come along. So if you read his book, The Human Phenomenon, and I like that title, which was retranslated from The Phenomenon of Man, the 1959 translation, to the 1999 translation of The Human Phenomenon. That's what we are, a human phenomenon. It's not all about us, like, ta-da, evolution just kind of arrives at us, like, oh, the human. Rather, we are part of this cosmic, dynamic, evolutionary flow. So, so why this is important for us is that we are, in a sense, everything that evolution is. So it's this recurring pattern, and what's taking place in evolution continues to intensify, complexify, and then is recapitulated or summarized or brought together on the level of the human person. And what is it about us that makes us so special? Well, we can think, sometimes we can think, not always the time, but let's take that for, a norm. We can think, and not only can we know, but we know that we know. So we're reflective, we're self-reflective. And that does set us apart. I mean, and Teilhard was, clear about that. We're part of this evolutionary flow, yet we know, and we can reflect on the very process that has, you might say, made possible the emergence of what we are on this level of thought. Wow, that's pretty amazing. So, what are we? That's the big question. That's why I'm teaching 2 courses this semester on this whole thing, because I don't think we really know what we are. And that's why artificial intelligence comes at us so shocking. First of all, I don't think we have a good handle on evolution itself. I think in the wider public sphere, it has this kind of, again, a very neuralgic response. Like if you say to people, "Oh, you come about by way of evolution. You're an evolutionary phenomenon. You're just another animal." And people are like, "Oh my God, no, absolutely not. I am not an animal by any means." But I'm like, have you looked at the way we behave sometimes? I mean, really, we're not all that better. Um, and yet, uh, yeah, we come about by this process. We are emerging out of, a long, long process of developing life. We're both animal, but then we are angel. We have this, we're kind of suspended creatures. We belong neither, we belong both to the biological world and to the spiritual world. And therefore I find that, this is really important. Why I'm putting it here is because this idea that we are suspended between animal and angel plays out in artificial intelligence. It's a huge component of what's driving some of these things. So anyway, going back to Teilhard, he, he saw the emergence of the computer. In 1950, he was introduced to, this new machine that came out. And, we know Alan Turing's imitation game, 1950, can a computer think like a human person? Teilhard was fascinated by just the possibility that a machine could think like a human person. And he anticipated what a thinking machine could do for us, what it would mean for this human phenomenon. And so he began, in his essays on the future of man, he began to speculate and kind of anticipate that we would become linked, by minds, electronic minds, and develop into a type of global brain, what we call the internet today. And that he said, that will, we're in evolution. So for Teilhard, that will change us. We'll move from what we are to a type of homo progressivist, a progressive type of person. We can say maybe a techno sapien, uh, whatever the word you want to use. We are a species in evolution, in transition. And the whole thing for Teilhard, and I'll stop at this point. So if you want to get some questions in here, but the whole thing for him is being governed. So it's being governed by Omega, right? So we're not just in. So Teilhard would say this is not a blind random process. Like, wow, look what we developed, and we don't know where we're going with it or what we're doing with it. Why Teilhard is important is he actually had a vision. He had a whole architectonics, a framework out of in which he inserted the role of technology in the larger scope of evolution. And I think that's what we're missing today. We're missing the architectonics of AI. We can tell you all about it, and we have all our fears about it. But what's the bigger picture for it? And that's where I think Teilhard can be very, very helpful to us today.
Hmm. Oh no, this is extremely helpful. Um, there are a couple things you mentioned that I'd love for you to expand on just a bit,
Yeah,
uh, so we can see how they show up when it goes to conversations around AI. And one is Teilhard's kind of rejection of both a materialist account of the world where mind in any way without the reality of mind, you have an inadequate scientific account. And but also how his kind of groundedness in his scientific work of coming to understand evolution led him to reject uh, the kind of supernatural dualist vision of mind and matter that has so dominated a lot of Western philosophical and theological reflection.
yeah,
Um, could you kind of like show that the contrast points to help us get that kind of the dual aspect monist vision or the
yeah.
pan-experientialist vision?
Right. So Teilhard held what we would call today a panpsychic position. And it's the way he conceived of consciousness in relation to matter. Uh, for him, consciousness is in his words, consciousness is the matrix of matter. So he sees this that matter is not all that it appears to be. I think that's the first thing. So materialists are kind of the equivalent of biblical literalists. Like a rock is a rock is a rock. There's nothing more going on there but rockness. Well, there is rockness, but there's more to the rockness than meets the eye. And that's basically what he was saying is that there is an inner dimension of matter that can only be experienced, right? It's not something that you can measure or you can empirically verify. It's the experience of matter itself that leads to the insight that that matter has a depth and a quality to it that cannot be entirely reduced to scientific reductionistic terms. And on the outside, so he speaks about matter having this withinness and withoutness, this kind of within quality of mind or consciousness, and the withoutness as the quality of attraction. That matter has this attractability aspect to it. So matter is this was his whole world. His whole world is actually it's all about matter, but it's not just matter in opposition to spirit or body and soul or how we divide these things up. The whole of what we are and what we long for and what we believe in is actually tied up in the experience of the real, of what matter is. And so this dual aspect monism means that matter has two aspects: a withinness, a withoutness, a mind and a consciousness and attractability, and they are two aspects of the one reality. In other words, they account for aspects of our experience of the world that cannot be reduced to one or the other. We're not entirely spiritual, we're not entirely material. We are, in a sense, this kind of we're a holistic, a holism in this way of the depth, breadth, and with in terms of attractability of existence of in terms of matter. So that's his position, and that's number one. And the second thing that's really important here with regard to AI is that Teilhard was, there's, and now I haven't come across a lot of writings on this, but he was kind of in moving to the same camp of Carl Jung, and kind of the idea that mind is essential to what we're about. And I think one of our problems is the way we've treated mind, both philosophically and certainly theologically, as if it's something that is left out of the picture until we come along and then we have God in mind and us all kind of tied together. But mind is as intrinsic and as natural to the human phenomenon as matter itself. So for Teilhard, consciousness is a natural phenomenon. Mind is a natural phenomenon. It's what's developing all along. And that places him in a different camp. Actually, it's one of the areas that distinguishes him from Catholic theology, from classic Christian theology. It's the way he locates mind at the heart of matter.
Mhm.
And why technology then is not going to be a huge, you know, like a huge wow, what do we do? Because basically what we're saying, and he doesn't spell this out too much, but it's in his writings. Biology, life is techne. It's what, it's been technological since basically day one, since the asteroids collided and, the paramecium were groping to find their way in the pool of life. There's something that's built in, whether it's a built-in awareness, what we might call a proto-consciousness, but there's a continuous feeling out of the environment, developing tools, even simple tools that will optimize life. So life seeks more life. That's the basic, in my view, that's the basic law of biological life in the universe. And so I don't think technology on the human level is really too much different than technology on any other previous level of biological life or evolving life. I mean, when you look over the span of time, it's so interesting. It's not only adaptability, but it's mimesis. Like we want to imitate and perfect. So one thing about we learn, and Teilhard does spell this out in terms of his energies. He has tangential energy, or the energy of attraction, like we're attracted to things. But then he has radial energy. It's an energy of transcendence. And I think what we are seeing with AI today is actually an enhanced radial energy. And I think what AI is doing, it's blowing up our transcendent dimension of life. And but we've always had this, by the way, so we developed from four-legged to two-legged, and then it was a lot to keep walking around the earth and walking to get your food, and therefore we developed little wheeled vehicles to move us faster, and then we got to cars, and then we saw birds flying, and we said, "Cool, we can do that too." So we developed kind of bird flight and call them airplanes, and so we started to fly. And we kept, humans come along. We're imitating all other aspects and building technology on the mimesis of, biological life, but we're perfecting it, right? And that's what we do. We go beyond what is towards something that is not yet. And that's why Teilhard's important. What is the not yet towards which we're moving? So the realm of the mind, I think just that we've built, we have cars, we have airplanes, we have, cell phones now, we can, communicate at will. So the mind is sort of the last frontier. Why not? That is the last frontier of not only extending of it, but transcending it. Like how can this mind go beyond itself towards something more? And what is the something more? And that's where Teilhard, I think, has a vision for how artificial intelligence can lead us towards, in his view, what's guiding the whole thing, a greater principle of wholeness, a more unified planetary life.
Mhm. Okay, so this is something uh, I've wanted to know, and I came up with two different answers of how Teilhard might answer it. And so you're just gonna channel him and help me out,
Yeah.
because I've had this experience of when I read you or I'm reading Teilhard, because there's such a similarity between Teilhard and Whitehead, that when there is a gap, I tend to fill it in
Yes,
with Whitehead, and I wanted so that's why I'm asking this
please.
question.
Yeah.
I love the language of when thinking about dual aspect monism of withinness and withoutness, that matter has these two elements. And in a sense, the only experience of withinness any individual has is our own experience of ourselves. Like we experience our first person version of ourselves. I haven't experienced being Ilia, but I've experienced the withoutness of Ilia. And then I recognize the dignity of her subjectivity, that she is an in experience. You have your inner story as well. But like I haven't had it verified. I don't have access to it because it's not mine. Right. Um, and that part of recognizing the withinness and the withoutness in a evolutionary picture, is that that means the withinness, our experience, is one that could not have existed at the beginning of our space time. Um, and I know as that you've spent a lot of work both in chemistry and such, and that there was most of our cosmic history spent a while just to get a enough of a periodic table so that then the chemicals could get around to having enough fun that biology emerges. And then you have to have the right planet ecosystem and everything for something as complex as ours. And so the part of the difficulty that we have in imagining a world where we're not either right a magical intervention and be like a dualist, where all of a sudden we get spirit or soul and nothing else have it, or that we're just telling ourselves a story and that our experience of withinness is just fan fiction of some DNA or chemicals running around. To move beyond either one of those, then that experience of withinness that we have it exists in some way on a dial, right, of intensity, where there's less intense forms of it when quarks start dancing in patterns that are rhythmic, right? 13 billion years ago, all the way up to the present. And I would love to hear how that kind of growing complexity of experience that eventually emerges in something like our own subjectivity.
Yeah.
Um, how does Teilhard describe that story, and in what ways is that the way he understands withinness and withoutness uh, able to articulate the potential of um, silicone based experiential centers or algorithmically oriented
Yeah.
sensing of the world?
Hmm.
Like, because I feel like there's some uniqueness to Teilhard's position that can help us uh, uh,
Yeah.
imagine questions of AI, consciousness, and such in a different way than some other traditions.
Yes. No, it's a great question. And I want to also honor Josh Patterson's question on Omega. So let's keep that one, let's put that in the background. So let's go back to, one thing as you were asking, posing your question, Trip, I do think we tend to lean onto the side sometimes when I hear it in the language, and it's kind of a binary language without even trying to be binary. Even though you are a bona fide, well-respected process philosopher, and I deeply respect, but it's not you. It's just the way it's written into sort of our cultural DNA. We just tend to think in binary terms. Teilhard is not a binary thinker. That's the one thing I think we can say with some real faith in his in his work. And that's why we have to start thinking out of a different framework. We're so indoctrinated into binary thought, whether it's dualism or Cartesian dualism or just the binary language, that we reduce scripture to sometimes. And withinness and withoutness, let's take those two terms because that's what your question is referred to. It is rather so. What is this withinness, right? If we're just, coming out of this cosmic soup, and yet there's something deeply personal and openness to God, to divinity, to something that cannot be grasped, and yet it already grasps me because it's the very, in a sense, the very isness of my being, and so we can't name I mean, and here I'm gonna, just kind of give a shout out to Jack Caputo's Theopoetics, or weak theology. Insofar as, you know, we use the language of God too liberally, like we actually know what God is, and that God's, that's my withinness, that type thing. And I'm like, okay, slow down, chill up, because Teilhard didn't speak of that. In fact, one could see within his doctrine a type of weak theology. There's a and breath doesn't quite capture it, but he himself tells us, as he held matter, he was held by matter. There's something there, it's ineffable, and it can't be named, not too quickly anyway. And sometimes we want to name everything because the minute you name something, you own it. You have a control on it. And that's what Teilhard is trying to get at. Like, this is the uncontrollable control, thing that we're holding in my hand. And that's the part of this withinness, withoutness, that he begins to reflect deeply on. And so we can name that withinness, not only in terms of consciousness, because that too can lead to a reductionistic type, oh well, it's just the way my mind works, and that's me. But that is not you, right? The mind itself is just so complex and multi-layered. So as you go down into the who are you anyway, you know the you of you, we come to that, that Rudolf Aldo idea of the mysterium tremendum fascinans, that tremendous mystery of myself, that uh, and that's what the mystics are about. So it's a constant, living from that ground, or that unknowable, known, insofar as that I don't know it entirely, but I do know that there's something or someone at the heart of my life. And what he's saying is that withinness is the withoutness, right? So rather than separating these things, because we're like, oh, here's my within and here's my without, actually your within is your without. That's it's a seamless flow. And and to put this in other terms, in other words, if my withinness is unreconciled, if I'm not really at home with myself, if I haven't, really taken time to center, to go deep within and dwell in the unknown, then I live with a lot of anxiety. I have a need on the outside to control a lot of things because I need the sense of control. And that's where I think we kind of uh, not failed ourselves, but we do ourselves an injustice by not acknowledging the mystery that we are. And that's the thing. What Teilhard recognizes is that each person, I think, each we are individuals becoming persons. A person is a relational being. And therefore, it's an ecstatic and an enstatic process. It's a going out and coming in. So I think of personhood more like the ocean. We're like waves in an ocean. We move out onto the shore, and then we recede within ourselves, taking in new shells, new things, new life. And therefore, even though my withinness is mine and it can never be yours, and therefore, where do we find our common space? And this is where I think AI is very helpful, because it opens up for us the fact that really what joins us together is not so much the mystery of me meeting the mystery of you. That's actually mystical depth is what gives each person personality. But the personalities that we are meet in this level of interstitial space. We can call it Zoom or webinar space. And there's something that takes place here that is neither entirely me nor entirely you, but it's us. It's a we space. And, I guess what? I think we have companies called we space or, this type of thing, right? Because they got it. So it's the hyperstitial space or the interstitial space of personhood. And that's what Teilhard recognized, where technology can actually enhance what has always been there latently. I mean, even in oral cultures, if you talk to a person, you're not entering into their withinness, but you are there's something that takes place precisely in the in between space of person to person. And that's where life happens, by the way. It's the in between space where life grows and where we become deepened by precisely participating in that space. So Teilhard's famous maxim, union differentiates, right? Which sometimes I think I see some understandings of that. They're not quite correct. What he's basically saying is that the more we are in union with one another, the more we share in that interspecial space, the more we become ourselves, because it's precisely the core, that mysterium, that mystical core of who I am, that is actually, enriching that space as it interacts with your core. And so we have this kind of meeting of energies that actually differentiates in the core personhood. And therefore each person becomes something of a piece of glass radiating divine light and participating in the wholeness of what's emerging, of what, in this large meeting space of life itself, what we call information or, growing insight together. But you could see in Teilhard's paradigm that AI would almost be a natural outcome. Like, even if we hadn't developed it, if you read Teilhard, someone should develop it by the time you finish his writings, because that's exactly what it is. It's about, you know, um, uh, even divinity, humanity. If we wanted to speak about, what's taking place, we never become God, and God never becomes us, but God is always us, and we are always God. So there's always this differentiating process going on. The more we are in that interspecial space of communication, of shared life, the deeper, the more enriched our personal lives become. So Teilhard has been misdiagnosed as we're going to become in this flatless, seamless unity, a totalitarian thing. That's just the opposite of what he writes about. Not totalitarianism, but just the opposite of the rich diversity of which unity is composed of.
Mhm.
No real unity without the richness of diversity, which depends on our withinness. And
Yeah. You know that uh so I had my two running theories here. This makes me think, so the one I was hoping the answer was sounds a lot like what you're saying, and I was thinking of the withinness as something much akin to nesting dolls, in the sense that like any form of withinness already contains within it multitudes. And there are practical examples almost anyone nods at if you use the metaphor, right, from your microbiome to the ecosystem you're in. And we've already seen the problems of both forgetting the withinness and forgetting the nested relations, right? Um, for either direction. Um, and I wonder, one of the reasons I find that to be more potent in someone like Teilhard than Whitehead, is the kind of atomism of traditional Whiteheadian philosophy. Unless you pull like a Father Joe Bracken, and take Whitehead's concept of society and do it in a robust way, or develop field theory and do it these other ways. And so, like, when you take a Whitehead style of Bracken, I can see real resonance between what you're
Mhm.
describing here, within Teilhard and your own kind of extension of the work.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think, I think Joe Bracken had a unique way of interpreting Whitehead's process philosophy in terms of societies and, these kind of units or societies that are constantly, it's about intersubjectivity and interacting. Taylor doesn't use that language. And I think I tend towards Teilhard precisely because I think more in terms of energies, and I like the fact that energy there's a within energy, a without energy, and a divine energy, a human energy, and it's kind of this entanglement of energy itself, and the entanglement is always being, in a sense, differentiated by, you might say, acts of consciousness or acts of awareness, which is really kind of interesting. So in that sense, I do favor Teilhard, but I do think we don't, and I'm going to say this with regard to AI, we don't give enough attention to withinness, to the fact. So Teilhard, his whole doctrine on the future, I mean, on technology and the future of the human, is really based on mysticism. The whole thing is really driven by the withinness of what we are. And I think we reduce everything to the withoutness, and we're all fearful about becoming robots and, biohacking and all this kind of stuff. And we do have to be careful because I think we can develop AI without withinness, and that's dangerous. And I think that can lead us to a very dystopic future. But that's not what Teilhard was saying at all. He was saying that that withinness, that mystical, and without yeah, AI is a military. Sure. I mean, certainly there's dark sides to AI. I mean, I'm not going to uh, downplay that at all. But that's not what it's about. I mean, we how we use these things is one thing. Why they're developed is another. I mean, they're not entirely separate, but they are distinct. Uh, so what I was going to say here is, what was I going to say? So withinness, withoutness, I think we need to keep that as a seamless flow. And I think of Maria Reina Rilke's poem, Outer World Within. That's a great poem. If you're not familiar with it, it's really what Teilhard's world was about. Outer world within. My inner world and my outer world are one and the same world. They flow from inner to outer to inner again. And therefore it's how someone like Eddie Hillesum in a concentration camp, could see the beauty of God in a cracked piece of concrete where a flower is budding through. Other people see darkness, they see death, they see violence, and she saw something of beauty and radiance. How does someone see that in the middle? That's the whole thing. So that's another thing for Teilhard. The depth of your withinness, your inner world, is how you see the world. So vision plays a significant role here for him. How do we see a world that is unfolding now with technology? And it's how, it's from what level, from what center are we seeing? So I just wanted to throw that out there
Yeah.
as
Well, one of the things that I I'd love for you to help us kind of like get a grip on is you mentioned earlier Teilhard got in trouble and didn't end up publishing a lot of stuff till after he had passed away, and some of it was tied to um going like, oh, no, we don't need a historical Adam and Eve. This isn't needed. Like once you start to understand the story of evolution, then it changes the way you understand anthropology. It also gives you a different frame for reading the sacred text and seeing what kind of wisdom is there if it's not answering the question we thought it was, right? Um, and one of the things that the church has regularly had to come to grips with in the last 400 years are scientific discoveries that expand and deepen our picture of the cosmos, right? From humanity and Earth being at the center to then understanding the way we're connected to all the life on our planet, and that our planet's one among many around this one sun, and this sun's one among many in a galaxy, and then there's a whole universe, and this kind of thing. And his way of rereading the history of essentially like the history of Christ along with the history of the cosmos gives a different frame, and it fascinatingly that it's there thinking about the larger story of evolution, that the kind of language he develops, the language that sounds like it was anticipating something like AI. um
yes. Hmm.
and these different kind of spheres that emerge out of the story of evolution, that then new possibilities come into being, and then over time a whole nother sphere emerges, and there's this kind of like growing upward along with kind of the growing outward movement. And so I'd love to hear you kind of tell that story in a way that the emergence of humans and religion is a part of it, and that what's the invitation to take this cosmic story of evolutionary emergence seriously when we're facing questions around AI and the future of a religion beyond, our axial shaping of them.
Right. You have a lot there, Trip. You have a lot of
Well,
good
look,
questions.
I hadn't talked to you for like 3 months, so my notebook of questions for Ilya just gets bigger.
Yeah, no, great questions. So let's try to, pull this apart a little bit. You began with, his the fact that Teilhard did not accept original sin, as necessary to hold for Christian belief, and that is true. And basically, his position was, issued as a scientist, and he said it's biologically impossible that a universal condition could really be generated by a single couple by monogenism, and perpetuated, species after species idea. So um, he kind of dismissed original sin. There were not two people, Adam and Eve, in a garden, and it wasn't because the woman got it wrong that poor Adam fell into sin, and how Aristotle got hooked into that interpretation as well. So we have a lot of problems actually, precisely because we accepted that doctrine, I think. But okay, that's another story. Actually, I'm not sure. A lot of people want to keep original sin. They want to keep. They feel the necessity to maintain the fact that we are a weak, fallen human nature. Now that position actually goes several ways. One driver actually for the development of technology, especially if you read Francis Bacon. He was like, well, yeah, we sinned, but guess what? We can develop technologies that now, not only help us surpass ourselves, but we can become even better than the angels. So, someone like Francis Bacon said, yeah, sin was around, but, guess what? We're going to surpass everything anyway with technology. Teilhard had nothing of that really. And two things here I want to say is that we don't have a good understanding of what we are. And that's why we have a need to explain our violent ways, our ability to maim and hurt one another. We want to explain the deep fractures within humanity by way of sin, which is basically missing the mark, being fractured. But I think there's another way to look about sin, and that is the deep, deep disconnect between our unconscious selves and our conscious selves. I think evil is not so much outside us as within us. So, Teilhard does not, he himself wrote in such a way that he sometimes can seem almost dismissive of evil or kind of mitigates it. He just says, well, it's just part and parcel of a very large universe, and things are bound to go wrong. And so I don't think he lived through a lot of suffering and violence. So I don't think he meant to lessen what evil is about, but nor did he see it as the reason for the incarnation or the Christian message. So Teilhard really took a much more Franciscan approach, if I might say that here, to what the incarnation is about. Why did God become human? And I put it, actually, I'm going to put it in a quasi-scotistic term. In other words, Duns Scotus in the 14th century said, well, the reason God became human was not because of sin, but because God is love. And from all eternity, God willed to love a creature to grace and glory. So whether or not sin ever existed, God would have become human. And there's something about that doctrine that kind of captures Teilhard. Now, Scotus puts Christ at the beginning of creation. Teilhard sees Christ as the fulfillment of creation. So Scotus has Christ at the beginning, Teilhard has Christ up ahead. And that's the way he conceives evolution, that divinity, or this life of, life, the power of life itself is becoming more whole, more personal, in and through evolution. Something, he says, it's not only something, but someone who is in evolution. So Teilhard actually speaks about the complexity of God, that God, the name God, it's a name that speaks to what's taking place within this power of life itself. And that God is that which is coming into greater personalization through greater consciousness and through love. So he puts love as the primary energy of the universe, and basically, my heart is warmed by that because he is deeply Franciscan there, right? So God is love. Love is what God is, and that's the way I would put it. You know, God is not someone who loves, but love is what God is. So that love energy, that unitive energy, that energy of attraction, that irresistible energy that no matter how much you try to squish it, push it out, dispel it, it's always there because love is unconditional and eternal. And so love becomes ever more increasingly conscious love, which I think is what we see in the emergence of Jesus of Nazareth. And so Teilhard is right there, that in Jesus, there's a new awakening to this immediacy of a divine power of love, which calls us into community, into justice, etc. But it also calls us to create a new future, that we can't stay as we are, and that is what it means to be an unfinished person in an unfinished universe. We don't stay as we are, we're becoming something more. And moreness is what, in a sense, defines Teilhard's doctrine. And this is where artificial intelligence, then, or what he would conceive or perceive as where computer technology can take us, it can lead us not only to more knowledge, but knowledge, he says, without love is useless, right? So the type of knowing that Teilhard would anticipate with AI is a knowledge deepened by love or wisdom. And so that's our question. We're not there because we're not thinking about AI within a cosmic context. We think of AI as in a very mechanistic terms, like a machine. We can oil this machine better. It can function better with computers, and we don't need people anymore. But Teilhard was a process thinker. He's thinking in terms of deep relationality. And he's thinking that AI can actually deepen what we are together, but it does require that we bring other values into that deepening of life together. We need values of love and compassion and wisdom. We need, in a sense, values of forgiveness and letting go, surrender. There are things that need to take, it's not all AI will do it for us. AI is, well, AI. A machine is a machine. So it's not to supplant or replace us, it's to enhance what we all have already have the capacity for. And I think that's what Teilhard saw, that we can become an ultra human. We could be more just, more peaceful, more unified if we use technology towards the fullness of Omega, which I want to get back to that question. Is Omega a fixed reality? Absolutely not for Teilhard. Omega is a governing principle. But, Teilhard was very clear that evolution can fail. In other words, evolution is what we're about, right? So if we decide to blow one another up and to decimate the earth, out of climate change, um, then God Omega cannot stop us, right? That's not possible. But it doesn't mean that Omega itself will not continue on, perhaps starting all over again with a whole new pattern of life. But can we abort this process of evolution? You bet we can. And Teilhard was very clear about that in his essays on the activation of energy. So he did not have a naive view of, he had a limited view, not so much naive. He was a very profound thinker. And we have to be careful about asking questions today because we know so much more about technology, 70 years later after Teilhard's death, than he knew in his own time. So be careful about reading questions back into him. Think of where he's writing. 1950, right after the Korean War, two world wars, the Korean War, the Cold War, communism, Marxism, and he's seeing that technology has the capacity, to bring us into a greater human, planetary, not just human, planetary way of life. And he did speak, he used the term planetization. So for those who think that Teilhard was only about this anthropocentric, like superiority, totally off the mark. The word he used is planetization. We are everything nature is. So we are always related to everything in nature. And we bring that awareness into a greater sense of depth and unity and compassion for the whole. It's about love of the whole. And that's how I would translate Teilhard and his what he anticipated with technology. Will it lead us to a greater love of the whole or not? That's our question.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the things I found the more I think about this, especially when the kind of question that Gary was asking about the more techno pessimist view of someone like Alul, who people can go listen to a whole interview about it in the series, and then those that have a more optimistic view. I think one of the differences might be uh, like what is the frame of reference uh, that you're making your perspective from, and they might actually both be correct, right? So in one sense, what you've been sharing about Teilhard is there he is, like doing his work in China, understanding evolution as humanity is acting a fool in back-to-back world wars, and you're looking at the move from trenches to nukes and Auschwitz, and then you go, where the hell is God in this story? Right? Alul's asking a very similar question after the Second World War in France. But if you are a paleontologist and thinking about it, the story you're thinking of is a cosmic one, right? So the tragedy and ugliness and vileness of what you've just encountered in the violence of the 20th century and are asking this question is an eruption in a cosmic story where the divine has been inviting cooperative entanglements from a quantum fluctuation in a vacuum to this point,
Yeah.
right? So, like, what it represents is an intense protest to what the cosmic story of divine invitation has brought about.
Yeah.
That's different than when we ask the question of technology and it's about modernity. So part of what Alul's criticism is, and this is something in conversations we've had in the past. I remember when we had dinner and you and Brian McLaren and I were talking about technology and how in our current context it gets seized and harnessed by uh, the very mechanisms that exploit the poor in the planet first, and by the military industrial complex. And so it's hard for people whose imagination, especially those that don't have an imagination that is it involves a persuasive, loving, inviting deity to bring like the whole cosmic story into being, to then go, there's something more getting itself done in technology than these exploitative powers, right? So what the frame of reference we ask in has such a shaping power to how we understand it.
Right.
And in my mind, there's like deep wisdom in both of them. But
Yes. Yes. Let me just because you asked the question before and I didn't quite get a chance to answer it because
because I asked a 5-minute question.
but it's a really, really important point, and that is the relationship between religion and evolution. And that's where, Teilhard was one of the very few thinkers for whom religion and evolution were actually two aspects of the one whole of reality. So he didn't. Part of the problem with the religious critique of modernity is how we're conceiving God, and that's and so there's two things. There's so many things going on here to tease out within how many minutes we have, like 30 seconds or something, because to tease this out means to say, well, first, who is the God of modernity? And of course, modernity has the whole, like, who needs God, because this God is a failure anyway. So it's the, human quest for power. And that kind of quest for power, that this is where I find the lines can get fuzzy, and if we don't keep Teilhard's vision and system in the proper perspective. Because there's one side that says, look, we don't need religion anymore because we are gods. I mean, that's the whole point. Like, technology gives us godlike power. And that's scary, right? You watch the movie Oppenheimer, and then he realizes, oh my God, we have the power to decimate the entire planet, in this one invention of a nuclear bomb. That's very scary. And that's not what Teilhard was advocating at all. He was kind of intrigued by the fact that we could even harness this energy, but that's the whole point. We have the capacity to harness this energy, but for what aim? For what, towards what? And that's without a understanding of God as part of that power, which is actually at the heart of evolution. Evolution in this way is all about the rise of divinity. The whole thing of evolution is about the rise of God. But you have to spell that out more clearly, because people hear that and they're like, what? That's crazy. How can God rise up? God is God, And it's like, well, really? Is that true? And that's, I'm going back to understanding, what is God? Who is God? How is God being itself? How is being becoming? What does becoming mean in terms of evolution? It's all implicit in Teilhard's doctrine, but in his view, evolution is what religion's about, and religion must be understood as part and parcel of evolution. And that's the shorthand way of saying you can't
Hmm.
separate these things out. Once we separate religion and evolution, then evolution is left up for grabs, and whoever has the power and the wealth to steer evolution will lead it into whatever blind future they want. And that's where, in a sense, we are today. We have religion all over the map,
Yeah.
and evolution is on kind of a blind trajectory. And it's like, well, we're scared because, we have the Mark Zuckerbergs and Bill Gates, and we have, Elon Musk, and what's going to happen to us? And it's really is sad that it got sort of out of control like this, because I don't even know if they knew what they were doing. Part of being human is, hey, we can do this, let's do it. That's what we're about. We're about
Hmm.
transcending ourselves. But for Teilhard, it's not that at all. It's something that's much deeper, much richer, much more complex, much more conscious, and oriented toward the fullness of love. That's his vision. And my job is to help us get back to that vision in a world that's quickly going all over the place.
In with that, the 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 one word we haven't used, which not sure how I managed to, is really his, like, the noosphere, and how he um understood the potential for the, like, when technology enables more interaction between the minds of people.
Hmm.
Now, and that's not too surprising, and given that that's what language did. That's what symbolic language did. Which, when you see humans emerge in the use of language and symbolic language, it was religious context where it first emerges. And as you see greater communication technology, you see a greater diversity and depth emerge between the group that you identify yourself with.
Right.
You can have better communication and cooperation, right? So, like, I can imagine how someone that's taking evolution seriously goes, you want to know how we stop acting a fool? uh, we develop bonds of cooperation and communication, and when humans do that, they level up on their value system.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, once we begin to see, you know, it's like the same. Yeah, like you're saying, Trip. We live in different parts of the world, different languages, different worldviews, and then we come together and we have a conversation. We go, oh well, you know what? We kind of do say things kind of in the same, similar way. You might have a different way of expressing it, a different interpretation, but our main vision, the vision we hold together is what? The good of the earth, the welfare of all life, all creaturely life, all people, the primacy of love, love as the good, as that which beckons us onward. And I think for Teilhard, what he said is, It's really about the future. And this is where I think this is where technology actually is inviting us into. How do we imagine the future? How do we envision the future? How do we co-create that future? With this power that we name as God, with one another. And I think part of that is coming back home to ourselves, in which here I would, again, give a shout out to the mystical element of being human, the mystical dimension of all of life, and to cherish and to relish that there's a sacredness to life, that we just can't quickly reduce life to, its and bits, to algorithms, to just erase the sacredness, the sacred depth of being, into just transposable, software programs. When we do that, we are deeply threatened in our existence, and we retaliate. And I think sometimes what I hear is a large apologetic defense mechanism taking place, the old fight or flight syndrome, and we're definitely in flight. And we have to neither fight nor flight. We have to imagine and we have to create together. And that's the beauty of where we are today on an AI global brain planet. You spoke about the noosphere. And Teilhard was, that's what he posited, the noosphere. Like we're on a new level of mind. We have evolved. That's what we can actually say. We have evolved from a biological level of life, out of which we're coming out of, certainly. And it's taken up, subsumed into a higher level of complexified conscious life that we call the noosphere. And this is not the end. And so that's it's not just going to play conscious, and the passive and the distance of life will extend beyond Earth as we continue to explore life in the galaxies, on other planets. So God Omega for him is not just some grandfatherly figure, consigned to Earth, but a much large, whatever is emerging in this wholeness of life. No eye can see, no ear can hear all that, God is for those who live in love. And I think we have to begin to get out of our fear mechanisms and begin to deepen our capacity for love, for compassion, for imagination, and for creativity.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Ilia, this has been a ton of fun, and I'm glad I got through the first 3 or 4 of the 20 topics I wanted to talk to you about. Luckily, we'll have more to talk about at Theology Beer Camp,
For sure.
which, if any of y'all want to join, theologybeer.camp is the website. October 17th to 19th, Denver, Colorado, and Ilia and I be there along with a whole bunch of our nerdy friends, and we're gonna have a good time.
Well,
And just like Jesus at a wedding banquet, at Theology Beer Camp, the beer never runs out.
oh, Trip, it's always good to be with you.
So thank you all for joining live, and well, and if you didn't, you're hearing this later, you're still valued.